The clock on the microwave read 6:42 a.m. when I saw her. The sun was still a hesitant suggestion below the horizon, a pale lavender blush against the hard gray steel of the winter sky. I was at the kitchen sink, holding my first cup of coffee of the day, watching the steam curl and vanish in the cold air of the room. Outside, the world was frozen solid. The lake was a vast, unbroken sheet of white, thick enough to drive a truck on, and my little ice house sat out there about 100 feet from shore, exactly where it had sat every winter for the last 60 years. And she was there, a dark slash of a figure in an expensive ski jacket, attacking its door with a crowbar. Her name was Brenda Miller. She was the president of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. And she was on my property. The rhythmic, percussive thud of metal striking wood carried clearly across the frozen expanse, a sound of violation in the morning stillness. I didn't rush. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest, and watched her. She was putting her whole body into it, leveraging the crowbar against the doorframe I had painstakingly rebuilt just 2 autumns ago. The wood splintered. A hinge groaned in protest. She had no idea what she was doing, in any sense of the phrase. I set my mug down on the counter, pulled on my heavy winter boots, and slipped into the insulated barn coat that had belonged to my father. I didn't bother with a hat. The cold was a familiar friend. I stepped out onto the back porch, the frigid air a sharp slap to the face. The crunch of my boots on the snow-covered ground was the only sound besides her continued assault on my property. I walked down the gentle slope, to the edge of the lake, my feet finding the well-worn path, even under a fresh 6 inches of powder. I stopped at the shoreline, where the land ended and the ice began. I didn't need to go any further. "Good morning, Brenda," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. It carried. She jumped, startled, and spun around. The crowbar was still in her hand. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal, eyes wide and wild. Then the mask of authority slammed back into place. Her chin lifted, her shoulders squared. She was performing, as she always was. "Arthur!" she snapped, her voice high and brittle. "It's about time. I am officially seizing this illegal structure on behalf of the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association." She gestured with the crowbar at the wounded door of the ice house. "This shed is an unauthorized construction on community property. It's a liability and an eyesore. As president, I am ordering its immediate removal. All contents are now property of the HOA, to be auctioned off to cover the fines you are about to incur." I remained silent, my hands in my pockets. I just watched her. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument would have. "Did you hear me?" she demanded, taking a step forward. The ice groaned faintly under her shifting weight. "I have the full authority of the board. We voted. You've been warned. You will receive a notice for a $10,000 fine for violation of covenants, plus the cost of demolition and removal. If you don't pay, we will place a lien on your house. Don't think we won't. We have the best lawyers." I pulled my right hand from my pocket. It held my phone. The small red light in the corner of the screen was on. I had been recording since I stepped onto the porch. I tilted the phone slightly to make sure the screen was visible to her. "Is there anything else you'd like to add, Brenda?" I asked quietly. For the record. Her eyes narrowed at the phone. "Ha." For a fleeting second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. Then it was gone, replaced by pure, distilled indignation. She believed her own narrative so completely that a recording was not a threat, but merely a testament to her righteousness. "Yes," she said, her voice rising. "I want it on the record that Arthur Jensen is belligerent and non-compliant. that he has illegally occupied HOA common property for years, despite repeated warnings, and that I, Brenda Miller, president of this association, am taking official action to rectify the situation as per our governing documents. I nodded slowly. "Thank you," I said. Then I put my phone back in my pocket. I looked past her at the splintered door of the little wooden house that my grandfather and my father had built with their own hands on a foundation sunk deep into the lake bed. I looked at the crowbar in her hand, a tool of creation she was using for mindless destruction. I looked at the ice beneath her feet, a solid, seemingly permanent surface that was, in reality, a transient state of being, dependent entirely on conditions it could not control. She had no idea. She had no idea who I was, what I did for 45 years, or what documents were resting in a simple manila folder on my desk. She had no idea that the very ground she was claiming wasn't hers, and that with every word she spoke, she was just digging her own hole a little deeper into the frozen water. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man whose entire life was about knowing, with absolute certainty, where the lines were drawn. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. It is important to understand that this wasn't about an old ice house. It was never about the ice house. It was about order. It was about the quiet, unassailable truth of things written down, measured, and recorded. It was about the difference between what is real and what someone wishes was real, and I have always been a man who deals in what is real. My name is Arthur Jensen. I am 72 years old. For 45 of those years, I was a licensed civil engineer and a professional land surveyor. I spent my life in a world of deeds and plats, of metes and bounds, of easements and encroachments. My job was to find the truth buried under layers of assumption, argument, and time. I'd stand in a muddy field with a set of century-old plans and a transit, and I would find the ghost of an iron pin driven into the ground by a man long dead, and I would say, with certainty, "Here. This is the line." It was a profession that rewarded patience, meticulousness, and a deep, abiding respect for the documented fact. It did not reward shouting. It did not reward emotion. It rewarded the man with the better records. I was very good at my job. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 5 years ago. We had bought this house on the lake 30 years back, the house my own father was born in. For me, it was coming home. For her, it was paradise. She loved the quiet, the rhythm of the seasons, the way the light changed on the water. She wasn't a confrontational person. She believed in politeness, in baking cookies for new neighbors, in letting small slights go for the sake of peace. "Just let it be, Arthur," she would say. "It's not worth the fuss." For a long time for her I did. After she was gone, the quiet of the house became a louder. The order and routine of my life became my anchor. The order and routine of my life became my anchor. I would wake up, make coffee, read the paper, and work on my projects in the workshop my father had built. My life was measured, predictable, and calm. I valued that peace above all else. It was a peace that Brenda Miller seemed constitutionally incapable of allowing to exist. Brenda had moved into the neighborhood about 8 years ago. She was a force of nature, all kinetic energy and loud pronouncements. She joined the HOA board within a year and was elected president the year after that. She saw the neighborhood not as a community of homes, but as her personal fiefdom. Her reign began with a flurry of violation notices. Mrs. Gable, 2 doors down, was fined $50 because her garden gnome was deemed tacky yard art. The family across the street was cited because their basketball hoop was left at the curb for 2 hours too long. Where? Brenda's power was built on the small, cumulative fears of people who just wanted to be left alone. It was easier to pay the fine, to move the gnome, to put the hoop away, than to fight. It wasn't worth the fuss. Her particular obsession, however, was the lake. The developer who built the Lakeview Estates in the 1980 seconds had purchased the surrounding farmland, but had been unable to acquire the handful of original lakefront properties like mine. Our properties predated the development by half a century. The developer had created a small, man-made beach and a boat launch on a parcel of land designated as Common Area. Brenda, through some spectacular misreading of the HOA covenants, had decided that this designation applied to the entire lake. In her mind, the lake itself, and all access to it, was HOA property under her direct control. The ice house was a particular affront to her worldview. It was a simple, 10 by 12-foot wooden structure, painted a dark forest green with a single door and 2 small windows. Inside, a trapdoor in the floor opened directly to the ice below for fishing. It sat on 4 concrete piers that my grandfather, a man who believed in over-engineering everything, had sunk 10 feet into the lakebed back in 1958. On paper, the ice house was not a temporary winter shelter. It was a permanent non-ambulatory structure with a foundation. It was, in the precise language of the county tax assessor, an appurtenance to my property. And I had the paperwork to prove it. My paper trail began long before Brenda picked up that crowbar. It started subtly, almost accidentally. The first fine she ever sent me was for improper storage of a watercraft. I had a canoe resting on sawhorses next to my garage, a spot where my family had been storing canoes since before Brenda was born. The fine was $25. I could have fought it. I could have pointed out that my property was not subject to that particular covenant, which applied only to the newer homes in the development tract. But fighting would have been a fuss, so I did what Eleanor would have wanted. I paid it. But I didn't just write a check. I paid it with a cashier's check. And I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. I kept the receipt. I kept a copy of the check. I kept the original violation notice. I put them all in a fresh manila folder. On the tab, I wrote one word, Brenda. Over the next few years, the Brenda file grew a notice. About the length of my grass, a complaint about the color of my mailbox, the original mailbox installed by my grandfather, a warning about unauthorized agricultural activity when I put in a small vegetable garden. Each time, I would consider fighting. Each time, I would think of the peace Eleanor had so cherished. And so, I would simply pay the small fine, always with a cashier's check, always via certified mail. I kept the receipts. I documented every interaction, every baseless accusation. I wasn't building a case. Not yet. I was simply observing. I was a surveyor, charting the boundaries of her escalating aggression. On paper, it was a masterpiece of pettiness. I knew this confrontation over the ice house was coming. Last winter, she'd begun referring to it as that derelict HOA shed in the monthly newsletter. This past autumn, at the annual HOA meeting, she had proposed a special assessment to have it torn down. I didn't attend the meeting. I had learned that her meetings were not for discussion, they were for acclamation. Instead, I had my lawyer draft a simple, clear letter. It wasn't threatening. It was educational. It laid out the facts, citing state statutes on riparian property rights, and including a high-resolution copy of the original 1952 survey plat of my property. The plat was a beautiful piece of draftsmanship, and it clearly showed my property line extending 200 feet into the lake from the shore, a neat rectangle that comfortably enclosed the ice house and its foundation. I sent the letter, along with its attachments, via certified mail. I got the little green signature card back in the mail a week later, signed in Brenda's flamboyant, looping script. I tucked it neatly into the Brenda file. Her response came not in a letter, but in her actions. A week after that, a new, no trespassing, private HOA property sign appeared, hammered into the ground right at the edge of my lawn, and then, this morning, the crowbar. The educational approach had failed. The time for quiet observation was over. She had crossed a line, a very clearly marked, legally recorded, and professionally surveyed line. Back in my house, after the confrontation on the ice, I didn't call the police. Not yet. An immediate police report would be useful, but it would be her word against mine. A messy he said, she said, that would resolve nothing. My strategy was never about winning a single shouting match. It was about making the final outcome so clear, so overwhelmingly documented, that no argument was possible. It was time to get to work. I went to my study. It was my sanctuary, a room lined with books on engineering, geology, and law. My old drafting table stood in one corner, a relic from a bygone era. On my desk was a large modern computer, but next to it, always, was a stack of physical files. I pulled the Brenda file from the cabinet. It was thick, now, nearly 2 inches of paper held together by a straining accordion folder. I set it on the desk and opened it. The certified mail receipts, the violation notices, the canceled checks, the newsletter was all there, a meticulous chronicle of her escalating tyranny. My first call was to Frank Gable. No relation to Mrs. Gable next door, which was a constant source of amusement in the neighborhood. Frank had been my firm's lead paralegal for 30 years before we both retired. He was a bloodhound when it came to digging through county archives and title records. He knew the dusty basements of the county courthouse better than the clerks who worked there. "Frank," I said when he answered, "it's Arthur. Arthur. Don't tell me you finally decided to take up golf." "Something a bit more in our line of work," I said. "I need a full title search and document pull on my property, and the adjacent Lakeview Estates common area, everything. Original plats, all deeds, easements, covenants, restrictions, the works. I want to go back to the original land grant if you have to." Frank was silent for a moment. I could hear the smile in his voice when he spoke. "Sounds like that HOA president of yours has finally pushed the wrong button." "She pushed it with a crowbar this morning," I said. "Give me 48 hours, he said. "I'll build you a fortress of paper." My next step was to check my own preparations. Last year, when Brenda's rhetoric about the lake began to escalate, I had taken some precautions. I had hired a reputable survey company and not myself, to ensure impartiality conduct a fresh boundary survey of my entire property, including the riparian portion. They used modern GPS equipment that was accurate to within a fraction of an inch. They located the original iron pins from the 1952 survey and confirmed their position. They staked the corners of my property, including the ones that were currently underwater, and provided me with a new, stamped, and recorded plat map. I had also installed a new security system. It included 2 small, high-definition cameras. One was mounted discreetly under the eaves of my back porch aimed toward the lake. The other was even more subtle. It was a cellular trail camera, designed for tracking wildlife, which I had mounted inside the ice house, looking out the small front window. It was motion-activated, and had been silently recording Brenda's every move this morning, uploading the footage directly to a cloud server. She had no idea she was the star of her own show. I spent the rest of the day in my study, organizing. I took every document from the Brenda file and scanned it into my computer, creating a digital, searchable archive. I cross-referenced every violation notice with the HOA's own bylaws, highlighting the specific articles she had misinterpreted or ignored. I created a timeline, a precise, chronological narrative of the harassment, with each event supported by a corresponding document. It was no longer a simple folder, it was a case. On paper, it was irrefutable. The next afternoon, Frank called. "Arthur, you are not going to believe this," he said, his voice crackling with the excitement of a historian who's just found a pharaoh's tomb. "I found the smoking gun. Hell, I found the whole damn cannon." He explained. When the developer Lakeview Estates, LLC, was planning the subdivision in 1983, they had a problem. Their master plan called for a large storm drain system to handle runoff from the new streets and homes. The most logical and cost-effective place for the main outflow pipe was to empty it into the lake, across the parcel designated as the community beach. However, that parcel shared a property line with my family's land. To install the 36-inch concrete pipe, they needed to run it right along the edge of our property. They needed an easement. My father, also an engineer, and a man who trusted developers about as far as he could throw them, had driven a hard bargain. He granted them a 20-foot-wide drainage easement, but he had his lawyer insert a very specific, ironclad clause into the agreement. Frank read it to me over the phone. The grantee, Lakeview Estates LLC and its successors, assigns, or homeowners association, shall be solely responsible for maintaining the aforementioned drainage pipe and its outflow point in a clear and operational condition to prevent erosion or flooding. Should said outflow be willfully or negligently obstructed by the grantee for a continuous period of 90 days, this easement shall be rendered null and void, and full unencumbered title to the 20-foot easement property shall immediately and automatically revert to the grantor, Jensen, or his heirs and assigns. I felt a slow, cold thrill run down my spine. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Brenda's pet project for the past 6 months had been the construction of a community gazebo. She'd had it built right on the edge of the community beach, a prime location with a beautiful view of the lake. A prime location that was, as I now realized, directly on top of the storm drain outflow. They had poured a concrete slab and built the structure right over it, completely sealing the pipe. The first big thaw was going to turn the street behind the beach into a swamp. "Frank," I said slowly, "when was the gazebo finished?" "According to the contractor's lien I found in the county recorder, because of course she hasn't paid him. Yet the final inspection was 94 days ago. She had no idea. She had no idea that in a rush to build a monument to her own authority, she had handed me the deed to her precious community beach. On paper, her gazebo was now my gazebo. The next move was hers, and it came 2 days later. I was in my workshop planing a piece of oak when I saw the flashing blue and red lights pull into my driveway. A sheriff's department vehicle. 2 deputies were getting out. I switched off the planer, wiped the sawdust from my hands, and went out to meet them. Brenda was already there, standing in my driveway, pointing a finger at my front door as if she had just cornered a dangerous fugitive. "That's him, officers," she declared, her voice ringing with theatrical urgency. "That's the man. He's a squatter, illegally occupying HOA property, and he threatened me. I am in fear for my safety." One deputy was older, a sergeant with tired eyes who looked like he'd seen it all. The other was younger, sharp, and observant, his gaze flicking from Brenda to me to the house, taking everything in. The performative tyrant and the neutral authority had arrived. "Sir," the sergeant said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "we received a call about a disturbance, a dispute over property." "There's no dispute," Brenda interrupted, stepping forward and brandishing a thick 3-ring binder. "It's all right here in our bylaws. This is HOA common land, and he has built an illegal shack on it. I am the president, and I am ordering him removed. He's trespassing." The sergeant held up a hand to silence her, never taking his eyes off me. "Sir, is this your residence?" "It is," I said calmly. I've lived here for 30 years. My father was born in this house." Brenda shrieked. The sergeant gave her a weary look. "Ma'am, let me handle this, sir. Do you have identification with this address?" "Of course," I said. I pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. He studied it, then handed it back. "And this structure out on the lake," he said, gesturing with his thumb. "She's claiming it's on association property." This was the moment. It was a test, not of law, but of strategy. I could have buried him in paper right then and there. I could have pulled out the new survey, the original deed, the easement documents, but that would have been a mistake. It would have turned the deputies into judges in a complex civil matter, a role they were not equipped or authorized to play. My goal was not to win the argument in my driveway. My goal was to create another piece of paper for my file. So, I didn't show him everything. I showed him just enough. "One moment," I said. I went back into the house and returned with a single, folded document. It was a copy of my most recent property tax bill from the county. I handed it to the sergeant. "That's the bill for this property, parcel number 42-Alpha 7. It lists me as the owner. As you can see, the assessed value includes the main house, the garage, and one outbuilding. That's the ice house. I pay taxes on it to this county every year." The sergeant unfolded the paper and read it. The younger deputy leaned over to read it as well. Their faces were impassive, but I saw the subtle shift. This was a document they understood. It was official. It came from the government they worked for. It connected me, my name, to this specific piece of land in a way Brenda's binder of bylaws could not. Furthermore, I continued, speaking slowly and clearly, the structure in question predates the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association by approximately 30 years. It is located on the portion of my property defined as riparian land, as established by the original survey and deed filed with the county recorder's office in 1952. I looked the sergeant directly in the eye. "I would like to state for the record, for your report, that Ms. Brenda Miller is making a false claim of ownership and is attempting to use your authority to evict me from my own legally owned tax-paying property." Brenda went nuclear. Her face turned a blotchy red. "He's twisting things. He's using legal mumbo-jumbo. Are you going to believe this old man, or the president of the Homeowners Association? Look at our covenants." She shoved the binder at the younger deputy, who took a half-step back to avoid being hit with it. The sergeant sighed, a deep, profound exhalation of a man who was counting the minutes to retirement. He handed the tax bill back to me. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, "this is a civil matter. It's a property dispute. It needs to be handled by lawyers and judges, not by law enforcement. We can't evict a man from a property he's paying taxes on. Based on the documents I've seen, he appears to be the rightful resident." "So you're not going to do anything?" she sputtered, her voice incredulous. "There's nothing for us to do," the sergeant said, his tone final. "I am advising you to cease all contact with this man. Do not go on his property. Do not attempt to enter that structure. If you continue, it could be considered harassment or criminal mischief. You need to take this to court." "Tau." He turned to me. "Sir, if she comes back on your property, you call us." He handed me his card. On the back, he had written a case number. "I'll be filing a report on this interaction," he said. It was a quiet confirmation. He had listened. He had understood. He had made a record. As the deputies got back in their car, Brenda stood in my driveway, vibrating with rage. She stared at me, her eyes promising retribution. "This isn't over, Arthur," she hissed. "You have no idea what's coming." I just looked at her, and for the first time, I think she saw something in my eyes other than quiet tolerance. I think she saw the cool, calm certainty of a man who had already won and was just waiting for the paperwork to be filed. As the sheriff's car pulled away, I went back inside and placed the sergeant's business card, with its precious case number, right on top of the stack in the Brenda file. The failed attempt to use the sheriff's department as her personal eviction service seemed to break something in the neighborhood's delicate ecosystem of fear. For years, Brenda had ruled by projecting an aura of unstoppable authority. The sight of the deputies leaving without taking any action against me was a crack in that facade. It showed she was not invincible. And that was all the encouragement some people needed. That evening, there was a tentative knock on my front door. It was my next-door neighbor, Margaret Gable. She was a widow in her late 70s, a kind, gentle woman who tended a magnificent rose garden. Brenda had been harassing her for years over the most trivial things: a placement of her bird bath, the color of her welcome mat. Margaret had always just quietly complied. She stood on my porch, now clutching a large purse to her chest, looking nervous but resolute. "Arthur," she said in a hushed voice, "I saw the police here today. I saw her yelling. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Margaret. Thank you for asking. It was just a disagreement." She shook her head, a flash of anger in her eyes. "It's more than that, and you know it. She's a bully. She's been bullying all of us for years." She took a deep breath. "I might have something that can help you." She opened her purse and pulled out a small silver USB flash drive. "I started recording the board meetings on my phone a year ago," she whispered, as if Brenda might hear her from across the street. "She's always changing the minutes, saying things were voted on when they weren't. I wanted a record of what really happened. It's all on here. All the meetings from the past year. I took the small device from her. It felt impossibly heavy. A concentration of truth. Margaret, this is incredibly brave of you. It's time someone stood up to her," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She's hurting our neighborhood. She made this beautiful place feel ugly." She looked me in the eye. "Good luck, Arthur." Margaret Gable, the fearful ally, had just handed me the conscience of the community. I spent the next 2 hours listening to the audio files. The quality was surprisingly clear, and it was damning. I heard Brenda shouting down other board members. I heard her explicitly instruct the secretary to creatively summarize discussions, to reflect a consensus that didn't exist. And then I found the recording of the meeting about the gazebo. I heard David Finch, the HOA treasurer, a quiet accountant I knew from the neighborhood block party, raising concerns. "Brenda, I'm just not sure about this," David's voice said on the recording. "A structure this size requires a county permit, and I've looked at the budget. We don't have the $40,000 for this, without a special assessment, which we'd need to put to a full community vote." "Nonsense, David," Brenda's voice boomed back, dripping with condescension. "It's a beautification project. We don't need a permit for that, and I found a contractor, friend of Maya, who will do it for much less. We can pull it from the reserve fund. I've already signed the contract." "You can't do that." David's voice was strained. "The reserves are for emergencies only. And signing a contract without board approval is a direct violation of Article 7 of the bylaws. I am the president, David. I am acting in the best interests of the community. My actions are the will of the board. Secretary, please record that the board has unanimously approved the gazebo project. Now, moving on. It was all there. The misuse of funds, the violation of bylaws, the falsification of minutes. It was a complete portrait of a petty tyrant, painted in her own words. The next morning, I called David Finch. I told him about the police report and about the audio recordings. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I knew it," he finally said, his voice a mixture of anger and relief. "I knew she was crooked. I've been trying to raise the alarm for months, but the other board members are too afraid of her. Arthur, what are you planning to do? I'm planning to attend the annual meeting next month, I said, and I'm going to bring my records. I'll be there, David said, his voice firm, and I'm bringing my records too, the real financial statements. And the ones that show what she's really been doing with our money. The coalition was forming. It started with Margaret and David, but over the next week, word quietly spread. 2 other families who had been unfairly fined contacted me, offering to provide written statements of their experiences. A former board member, who had resigned in protest of Brenda's behavior, called to offer his support. I was no longer just a solitary old man defending his property. I was becoming the focal point for a community that had finally had enough. We were preparing for the final confrontation, a quiet, organized rebellion armed, not with pitchforks but with paper. Brenda, of course, was not idle. She must have sensed the shift in the neighborhood's currents. Her failure with the police had wounded her, and, like any cornered animal, she lashed out with one last, desperate act of aggression. It was her final escalation, and it was a fatal miscalculation. A week before the annual meeting, a professional process server, a grim-faced man in a cheap suit, knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a notice of a property lien. Brenda had convened an emergency board meeting, which consisted of herself and her 2 loyal cronies, had voted to place a $10,000 lien on my house for the unpaid fines, and an additional, special assessment for ongoing legal violations. It was a breathtakingly stupid move. Filing a fraudulent property lien is a serious offense. It's not just a violation of HOA bylaws, it's a crime. She had intended to crush me under a mountain of legal and financial pressure just before the meeting, hoping I would capitulate. Instead, she had just handed me the capstone for my case. It was the final, undeniable proof of her malice and her flagrant disregard for the law. I scanned the lien notice, saved it as Exhibit F, and placed the original carefully in the Brenda file. On paper, her entire case had just collapsed under the weight of its own audacity. She had no idea she had just delivered the finishing blow to herself. The night of the annual meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. The air was thick with tension. It felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a courtroom just before the verdict is read. Brenda's supporters, a handful of residents who benefited from her favor or shared her belligerent worldview, had taken the front rows. They were a hostile, chattering block. In the back and along the sides of the room sat the rest of us. Margaret Gable, looking nervous but determined. David Finch, clutching a briefcase full of financial records. The other families who had been wronged. I sat in the back row, next to a calm, professional woman in a gray suit named Ms. Davis. She was my lawyer. I had decided that while I had all the facts, it was better to have a professional present them. The quiet professional needed his own corroborating professional. Brenda, standing at a lectern, at the front of the room, beamed. She was in her element. This was her stage. She was wearing a bright red blazer, a power color. She opened the meeting, not with procedure, but with a performance. "Welcome, neighbors," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured emotion. "I want to thank you all for coming. It has been a difficult year. Your board has worked so hard to maintain the beauty and value of our wonderful community." She paused, placing a hand over her heart. "But our efforts have been challenged, we have been attacked. One individual does not share our community values, has sought to undermine everything we stand for." She launched into a 15-minute monologue, a masterwork of victimhood and misdirection. She portrayed herself as a tireless public servant, beset on all sides by troublemakers. She spoke of her love for the community, her sleepless nights worrying about property values. She painted me as a stubborn, selfish recluse, a lawless man who was putting the entire neighborhood at risk with my unsafe derelict structure. It was a compelling performance, full of tears and righteous indignation. Her supporters in the front row nodded along, murmuring their agreement. I just sat quietly, watching the show, my hands resting on the thin briefcase on my lap. Inside was a single, neatly organized binder, the culmination of the Brenda file. Finally, she got to the point. And so, she concluded, her voice ringing with triumph, the board has been forced to take decisive action. We have levied the appropriate fines and placed a lien on the offending property to cover the costs of removing the illegal structure on our common lands. A motion is on the floor tonight to approve a special assessment to fund the legal battle to reclaim our lakefront. All in favor? Before her supporters could raise their hands, Ms. Davis stood up. "Point of order, Madam President," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and sharp, and it cut through the room, silencing the murmurs. Brenda stared at her. "Who are you?" "I am counsel for Mr. Arthur Jensen," Davis said calmly. "And you have several items of business that must be addressed before any such vote can be taken, including a formal challenge to the legitimacy of the fines and the lien you have filed, and a motion for the immediate removal of the current board president for gross negligence and malfeasance." A gasp went through the room. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of confident righteousness, froze. The color drained from it. "This is out of order," she stammered. "You have no right to speak here, Santa." "According to your own bylaws, Article 4, Section 2, Ms. Davis replied without missing a beat. "Homeowners or their designated legal representatives have the right to address the board during the annual meeting. I am Mr. Gax, Jensen's representative. I have the floor." She walked to the front of the room and placed a laptop on the table, connecting it to the projector Brenda had been using for her slideshow. "I have a short presentation." The collapse began slowly, then all at once. Ms. Davis was methodical, clinical. She did not raise her voice. She did not use emotional language. She simply presented the evidence, piece by piece. First, she projected a high-resolution image of the new, GPS-validated survey plat. "Exhibit A," she said. "A legally recorded survey of Mr. Jensen's property, completed this year. As you can all see, the property line, indicated here in red, extends 200 feet into the lake. The structure you refer to as the ice house is located here." She used a laser pointer to indicate a spot 100 feet inside the red line. It is, without question, on private property. Next, she showed the county tax records, the police report from the deputy's visit, and the fraudulent lien Brenda had filed. With each slide, a low murmur grew in the room. Brenda's supporters were starting to look confused, shifting in their seats. Then came the audio. "Exhibit D," Ms. Davis announced, "is an audio recording of the board meeting held on October 12th of last year." She played the clip of Brenda ordering the secretary to falsify the minutes about the gazebo project, shouting down David Finch's legitimate concerns about permits and finances. The room fell into a stunned, dead silence. You could hear nothing but Brenda's own voice, arrogant and dismissive, convicting herself. David Finch stood up from his seat, holding his briefcase. "I can attest to the accuracy of that recording," he said, his voice clear and steady. "And I have the financial records to prove the subsequent misuse of funds." Brenda was white as a sheet. She gripped the lectern, her knuckles turning white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The mask was not just cracked, it was shattered. Her supporters were staring at her now, their faces a mixture of confusion and betrayal. But Miss Davis wasn't finished. She saved the best for last. Finally she said, "Exhibit E." This is a copy of a drainage easement granted by Mr. Jensen's father to the developer of Lakeview Estates in 1983. The dense legal text of the easement filled the screen. Miss Davis highlighted the reversionary clause. But she read it aloud, slowly and deliberately. She then switched the slide to a recent aerial photograph of the community beach. In the center was Brenda's prized gazebo. A red circle was drawn around it. A second red circle highlighted the blocked storm drain. As stipulated by this legally binding document, Miss Eber. Davis concluded, her voice still perfectly calm. Due to the willful obstruction of this drain, for a period now exceeding 100 days, the easement is now void. Title to this 20-foot strip of land, she used the laser pointer to trace the area, has automatically reverted to its original owner. That means the land under the gazebo, and indeed the gazebo itself, is now the legal private property of my client, Mr. Arthur Jensen. That was the moment, the turning point. The precise instant the world Brenda had constructed crumbled into dust. She made a small, choking sound. Her carefully constructed performance, her entire identity as the powerful righteous leader, had been dismantled by a quiet, methodical presentation of facts. By paper, she had no response. She had been so busy performing her authority that she had never bothered to check if she actually had any. David Finch stepped forward. I, David Finch, Treasurer of the Lakeview Estates HOA, call for a vote of no confidence in President Brenda Miller and her immediate removal from the board, as per Article 9 of the bylaws. A homeowner from the back of the room, a man I had never spoken to, jumped to his feet. I second the motion. The room erupted. It wasn't even a contest. The vote was nearly unanimous. Brenda stood there, frozen, as her reign ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet show of hands. She had no idea it could happen like this. She thought power came from the loudest voice in the room. She never understood that true power, the kind that lasts, is written down, notarized, and filed with the county clerk. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda Miller was not only removed from the presidency but voted off the board entirely. The new board, with a shell-shocked but resolute David Finch at its head, immediately voted to rescind the fraudulent lien and all fines against me. My lawyer, Ms. Davis, filed a civil suit against Brenda personally for damages, which included all my legal fees and the cost to repair the door of my ice house. The county, alerted by a formal complaint from the new HOA board, launched its own investigation into the unpermitted gazebo and the blocked storm drain. Brenda was facing staggering fines from them, along with potential criminal charges for filing a fraudulent lien and for the blatant misuse of HOA funds. She sold her house and moved away before the end of the season. Her performative tyranny had left her with nothing. The healing of the community began almost immediately. It was like a fever had broken. The new board, under David's guidance, held a series of open meetings to go through the bylaws. They systematically dismantled Brenda's petty rules. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and suspicion was replaced by one of collaboration and relief. Neighbors started talking to each other again. Mrs. Gable's garden gnome reappeared on her lawn, and a week later, she brought me a freshly baked apple pie. She told me the neighborhood felt lighter, happier. It felt like home again. I, of course, was now the legal owner of a very poorly constructed gazebo. The board approached me in hand. I wasn't interested in being punitive. I was interested in restoring order. I told them I would happily grant a new, properly recorded, drainage easement to the HOA. My only conditions were that they bear the full cost of dismantling and removing the gazebo, and that they hire a licensed engineering firm to properly clear and repair the storm drain outflow to prevent future flooding. They agreed immediately. By the time spring arrived, all traces of the conflict were gone. The ice on the lake had melted, returning to its fluid, natural state. The ugly gazebo had been removed from the beach, and fresh sod was laid down, leaving a patch of impossibly green grass. The storm drain flowed freely. The Brenda file was now closed, its contents archived, a silent testament to a battle won. Not through anger, but through meticulous preparation. I find myself sitting on my back porch more often now. It's late afternoon, and the sun is glinting off the water. The ice house sits on its sturdy piers, its door repaired and repainted. A solid, reassuring presence. In my pocket, I have the new key for it. I had the old lock replaced, the one Brenda had tried to pry open. The new one is a heavy-duty deadbolt, the key is solid brass, and it feels cool and substantial in my hand. I thought a lot about what ownership really means. Brenda thought it was about control, about planting a flag, and declaring something hers. But she was wrong. Ownership isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. It's the duty of stewardship. It's about understanding the history of the land, respecting the lines on the map, and honoring the agreements that are written down. It's about the quiet, patient work of maintenance and care. It's about the paper. The deep, unassailable truth of the paper. The neighborhood is quiet again, it's the peace I always valued. The peace Eleanor loved. So much. It's a peace that isn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of order. A sense that things are as they should be, that the lines are clear, and that the truth, when properly documented, will always, eventually, prevail. I look out at the lake, at my little green ice house, and I feel a profound sense of calm. A long, deep exhale. Order, finally, has been restored. And it is very, very good.